I think it would behoove us to talk a little bit about a couple of the events that happened over the weekend. I'm thinking specifically of the just violence that's happening in Los Angeles right now as people begin to basically fight back against paramilitary federal law enforcement, which has been targeting, I don't know, elementary schools, immigration courts, and is certainly promising more violence to come. Similar clashes happened in New York. And I guess like I'm thinking about this happening at the exact same time this weekend where the Madeleine flotilla, the ship that was sailing to Gaza with Greta Thunberg, Liam Cunningham, and other activists, was interdicted in international waters by the Israeli military. Their cargo was seized, and they're currently being held in Israel. I'm sure they're about to be let out of the country, but like these things all seem somewhat connected in my mind in terms of like both who's being targeted by ICE, but also just like the fact that they're targeting schools and courts and just like picking people off the street. It all seems it's all coming home to me is what it seems like. And whenever something like this happens and like riots occur or there is violent clashes between people and federal law enforcement in this case, I think there's always this like round of debate about whether this is helping or hurting the cause of immigrant rights in America or immigrant communities. And rather than debate that, I just like whenever I see stuff like this, it's just like it's not a matter of whether it's justified or not, or whether you think it hurts or helps strategically. All those are other debates. This is just inevitable. Like when you treat people this way, eventually they're going to fight back, and like that, and that's what we're seeing right now. And like you can wish away that, oh, I wish it didn't have to be this way, but like the way ICE is behaving, like they're asking for it. They're courting this, and this is just an inevitable reaction when people see the law being turned against them in such an unjust way.
Yeah, I mean, that whole conversation about like whether it's people saying that they should be waving American flags or that they should be thinking about the Buttigieg 2028 campaign, it's particularly nauseating right now because I saw someone say okay, look, we shouldn't expect unaffiliated protesters to have the Democratic Party's best interests in heart, but it's so unfair that the Democratic Party gets affiliated with these protests no matter what happens. Which there's this larger narrative of the Democratic Party as like Gil from The Simpsons. There are these lovable losers who just all these bad things keep happening to them. Not that this is like a consequence of them co-opting every protest movement besides the ones that had anything to do with Israel in the last 20 years that had any popularity for their own electoral gain. They just did that 5 years ago. Obviously, I think it's ridiculous to say that, like, Chuck Schumer is in cahoots with like, fucking George Soros to create chaos in cities for what? I don't know. But if an internal poll comes out that like 65% of Americans support these protests, they will be all over it. They will have like in-house activists on the scene there. They'll produce a slate of candidates that like arise from the movement as movement leaders that we've never fucking heard of before. But secondary to that, I mean, this sort of reminds me of October 7th when people just before anything, the moment it happened, everyone's favorite thing to do is to act as their own Frank Luntz. They
Yeah.
only know people who are exactly like them, have exactly the same experiences, but all they ever do is just game out how the hypothetical median American will react to everything. With October 7th, it was all these people going, this is the end of any pro-Palestinian activism because Americans will just, everyone will just be so disgusted by this. It's probably the end of the left. And obviously that is not what happened. I mean, there are similar themes in how Democratic primary voters will often vote based on what they assume other Americans will consider too liberal or moderate enough. But it's especially now is such a fucking pointless exercise. This thing of just constantly gaming out what is the exact right thing, what is too scary, what is the right amount of resistance for the average American, as if the last 10 years have not shown that public opinion is completely amorphous, and all these opinions that pull a certain way, they don't seem so deeply held that they can't turn on a dime in 8 fucking months. And like, just the idea that the protesters in the first place, that their motivation is attracting public support, as if that is the be all and end all, that someone in Northern Virginia sympathizes with them, and not what I think was kind of the point of these protests, which was to put the actions of ICE front and center, to make
and also
everyone
to
actually look at it.
impose a cost
Yes.
on these lawless gangs of like these lawless press gangs of like masked without any identification or warrant or whatever, these masked thugs that are like, we all saw the videos this weekend of them just like tearing people off the streets, to arresting, seizing people at an elementary school graduation. Like, I would think the purpose of these protests is to enact a cost on, I'm sorry, these lawless gangs for their behavior. But Aída, I want to get you in here because, like, to Felix's point about like, well, how is this all going to poll? You recently covered the DC Welcome Fest, like centrist extravaganza, the centrist Fire Fest, and I'm just wondering, like, how is that section of politics? Like, how do they like metabolizing these ideas about like, is the American public pro or anti-immigrant, and like, are ICE detentions popular or unpopular?
Well, they're just totally unequipped to deal with the present moment. Their obsession with polling and data and the numbers and like the positions that they claim like regular people want, it reads us like especially out of touch when you have protests like these or things like the genocide in Gaza, and then at these events like they'll go through the entire thing without even slight mention or reference to it.
Because like, I think they will point to polls that show that like, oh, Trump's deportations are popular, but then like
Mhm.
when it's revealed that like they're deporting people without criminal records, and in fact they're seizing people at immigration courts who are going to apply for citizenship or check in on their visa process, and they're being the ones seized, it becomes very unpopular. Like, it's very popular when people imagine that these ICE is seizing like Pablo Escobar or drug cartel sicarios, but like not their neighbor or friend or spouse.
Yeah. I mean, we had this conversation about immigration during the last election, that like, okay, sure, I guess this sort of immigration restrictionism polls in a certain way, and it was never like 70-30. It was like 55-45. But you go back 4 years, and it was completely the opposite. Then, of course, like, obviously, when you adjust for torturing random people with green cards, stripping citizenship from people with green cards, sending people to these fucking unaccountable foreign hellhole prisons, what we said at the time was, when people actually see this in practice, you may get a different result. But at the time, I don't think we even imagined how like truly horrifying it would be in practice.
In terms of like imagining how horrific this all is, I mean, I think a lot of you probably saw that clip from over the weekend of police in Los Angeles just shooting an Australian TV reporter with a less than lethal round, and like not accidentally. Like, Felix, you pointed out, like you can see the cop in the video line her up, take sight, and pull the trigger.
The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. You just shut the fuck up. You okay? I'm good.
So if they're doing that in broad daylight, like being recorded on a live news broadcast, what do you imagine is taking place in the areas that you don't see and never will see being carried out by these same people? And then, like, once you imagine that, what do you think the like appropriate, strategically sound response to something like that is? Or do you think maybe that like the people targeted by this aren't thinking about essentially like this issue in those terms? Like, perhaps they're just afraid and angry and have a right to defend themselves against this kind of lawlessness.
By the way, does this conversation about optics extend to them? Does that extend to ICE agents and the police officers and the Marines that will probably end up killing at least a few people? Or is optics only a consideration for the people that are being fucking terrorized?